In 2020, Doom Eternal's release was met with pretty high praise from both critics and players alike.
Doom Eternal is probably the single greatest first-person shooter ever made.
It is the most fun I've had with a shooter in a long time.
It took a lot of what its predecessor, Doom 2016, set out to do and cranked it up to max. More intense combat, more vicious demons, and just overall more carnage. Nowadays, the conversation among fans about Doom 2016 versus Eternal is a little bit more nuanced, but at the time of release, there was really only one issue anyone had with the game. Enter the Marauder.
You were never one of us. You were nothing but a usurper.
A demon that mirrors Doomguy's stature, armory, and even his fashion sense. When you first meet him, he's introduced as a boss, but of course, in classic Doom fashion, a boss is really just an enemy you're fighting for the first time, and after this encounter, the Marauder is casually sprinkled throughout the rest of the game. Now what makes the Marauder special is his design focus on being a duelist. This emphasis on dueling demands two skills that no other Doom enemy really asks of you: spacing and parrying. Now you could make the argument that spacing matters with all the enemies to some degree, but what makes the Marauder unique is that you can't even damage him unless you're standing in exactly the right spot. Too far away, he throws his energy beams. Too close, a shotgun blast to the face. He will block your damage unless you're in that sweet spot, which then he'll do this attack, which is cued with a special sound and a glowing green eye, which can then be interrupted with a high damage shot and followed up with a few seconds of stun. Do this enough times and congratulations, you've defeated the Marauder. A lot of players hated the Marauder because fighting him felt like playing an entirely different game. As one Reddit user puts it,
I want to play Eternal like I could play every other Doom game in existence. Run and shoot. No thinking required.
Now, I would make an argument that Doom Eternal is not a no-thinking required game, especially on higher difficulties. But I digress, because this wasn't a rare complaint. Marauder hate was pretty widespread when the game released.
I don't really want this.
I had the opposite reaction when first facing the Marauder. Coming off Sekiro, where parrying is the game, I thought, damn, Doom needs more of this. The Marauder for me seemed to be a potential answer to a problem most FPS games couldn't seem to figure out: how to make a boss that wasn't just a bullet sponge. It seems I wasn't alone with seeing the potential in the old Marauder, because id took his controversial design and, well, built an entire goddamn game around it. Doom: The Dark Ages, the latest game in the Doom trilogy, has taken a pretty large departure from Doom Eternal, getting rid of the fighter jet speed, dashes, and frantic weapon swapping and replacing it with a lot of, well, honestly, Marauders. The Dark Ages tagline is stand and fight, and if you notice, Doomguy now has this nifty saw shield. This shield can be thrown and ricocheted around to Captain America some weaker demons in half, but it can also be used to, you guessed it, parry shit. Big demons have both projectiles and melee attacks that can either be deflected or parried to stun them. This is fundamental to the game's combat loop, to the point that it kinda is the game's combat loop. This is Doom: The Marauder Ages, baby. Enemies from the previous titles have all been Marauder-fied. Take for example the Mancubus. He used to have this zoning slam in the older games to keep you from getting too close, but it's green now. And we learned previously from the Marauder that green means parry, so you can walk right up to a Mancubus and parry his slam. Even the big baddie, the Cyber Demon, can sort of just be parry chained in this game. He's a laughable threat compared to his previous iterations. Overall, Doomguy's ability to parry has felt like it increased his power level quite a bit when compared to the older games, which in turn has decreased the power level of your average demon. This shift is hand in hand with the Dark Ages swap to larger outdoor areas rather than the claustrophobic arenas of the last two games. This means typically more enemies, longer sightlines, and quicker kills. Now I have been slightly hyperbolic when saying the Dark Ages enemy designs are just the Marauder, because yes, id clearly took inspiration from the Marauder, but there are also some pretty fundamental differences between them. The more controversial design choice with the Marauder wasn't the parry windows, but the spacing requirement. You could only get the parryable attack when you were in that specific distance from him, that Goldilocks zone. But in Doom: The Dark Ages, none of the enemies except a few have a required range to trigger their parryable attacks. Sure, there are some attacks that are only used up close or fired at a distance, and some enemies do force the Slayer to get near to avoid their gunfire. There's none of that stand right on this pixel here to bait out the singular parryable attack. I think this is why you won't hear the same complaints people had with the Marauder about the Dark Ages. Now, I have my complaints about Doom: The Dark Ages, enough that I might make a whole video on it, but the parrying is good. Parrying as a mechanic is part of what made me fall in love with Dark Souls the first time I played it years ago. It adds another layer of strategic depth to the combat, and I've been waiting for shooters to catch on and find their own ways to do this for a long time. Doom: The Dark Ages has found a way to balance shooting with parrying, melee combat, and combo matters gameplay in a way that is such a large departure from Eternal while still keeping some of that core Doom DNA. The enemies were all designed with parrying in mind from the ground up, and because parrying is the norm from level 1, it doesn't hit the player as a weird Marauder moment like in Eternal, where it felt more like a novelty. And maybe that's the most important lesson id learned here. You can't just have one Marauder, you need a whole army of them, or at least introduce the mechanics among multiple enemies, difficulties, and contexts. Overall, it has once again pushed first-person shooter design ahead with Doom: The Dark Ages, just like they did with 2016 and Eternal. We'll probably see a big wave in indie game design and perhaps even a few AAA titles of shooters with an emphasis on parrying. Now, before I have some very smart gamers in the comments correcting me, yes, Doom: The Dark Ages isn't the first shooter ever to have parrying. Hell, one of the most popular indie shooters of all time, Ultra Kill, has it as a pretty integral part of its combo system. But the level of integration Doom: The Dark Ages has with parrying is pretty damn unique for a first-person shooter. It's not just an optional one-off aspect. It has made 3 banger games with each not only iterating on the last, but creating an entirely new experience that stands on its own. The Marauder could have stayed a controversial footnote in Doom's history. Instead, it became the eternal seed that grew into the Dark Ages. Thanks for watching.